being a real estate owner or investor comes with a certain amount of risk. And it's a risk-reward conversation, right? Even for myself, I am not my clients, but I do invest in real estate, but in a much smaller way. And I think that it's important to make sure that you appreciate that oftentimes you can make really good money investing in real estate, but every once in a while there's a down market, or you might have a change in your life where you all of a sudden need that liquidity. And, real estate is not a liquid asset the way the stock market is.
You found the Real Estate Law Podcast, because real estate is more than just pretty pictures, and law goes well beyond the paperwork and courtroom arguments. If you're a real estate professional or looking to build real estate expertise, then welcome to the conversation and discover more at realestatelawpodcast.com.
Welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Law Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. We really appreciate it. We have an excellent episode, as we always do here. We are going to one of the heavy hitters in one of the biggest real estate markets in the United States. That is New York City. Rory, we've been waiting many, many months to speak with Belinda, and I'm eager to have you introduce her to our audience, because this episode has been, I'd say, at least 6 months in the making since we first heard from Belinda's team.
No, and I'm thrilled to be having this conversation, and the listeners will hear today that we're going to be talking about kind of real estate transactions and family offices at a scale that we really haven't talked about in the past. We'll be talking about doing the most complex transactions in one of the most regulated competitive markets in the country. But I don't want that to be intimidating to our listeners. In fact, I want our listeners to hear this and think about all the other opportunities that are not maybe apparent to them already. We talk a lot about small scale residential investing, so I'm hoping that some people will draw some inspiration. So with that, I'd really like to welcome attorney Belinda Schwartz to the podcast. She is a partner at Herrick Feinstein LLP, where she is the chair of the real estate department. So we have a heavy hitter here and an expert in the commercial space in New York City. Thank you so much, Belinda, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about your story and how you got started. You've been working in the space for a few decades now, 30 plus years, according to your bio. And, you've probably seen it all in the many, many decades of working in New York City and throughout the area.
New York City commercial real estate in general is crazy. New York City is crazy. But, it's funny you say I've probably seen it all, but the truth is I still haven't. And that's why I love what I do, because it never ceases to amaze me how much crazier it can get, and interesting and educational and intellectually stimulating and psychologically demanding as well.
In the intro, I said complex, but I think a lot of that just means that we have a lot of opportunity for new situations to arise, new ideas to present themselves that, some of us in residential real estate don't necessarily get to see. Could you talk to us a little bit about, some of the projects that you've worked on and some of kind of the new fact patterns that came your way?
Sure. So a lot of what I do is ground up development deals. And a lot of those are focused on residential development in New York City or throughout the country. And a little bit complex, obviously, because the deals are rather large. And so they require a lot of different participants, right? A lot of the sponsors and their developer partners, their equity players, their debt players. Often there are city and state issues. Affordable housing is a complicated conversation in this country. People come into the market, often start small, and some of them just really love it, find a lot of opportunity to grow their businesses. Not everyone starts out with a bundle of real estate that they've inherited. Some people literally do it from scratch, and I think that's pretty amazing.
That's kind of the perception that people have of New York. As I'm an insider and an outsider, because I'm from New York originally. I've spent plenty of time in New York City. I'm from the suburbs just north in Rockland County. Love going there and seeing all these massive buildings in Manhattan. And then you go to the outer boroughs and it's much different. I mean, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, and the Bronx are very, very different from what you see in Manhattan. Everyone thinks of Manhattan as New York City. Your point there, and people starting out on the smaller side. So you are saying that there is a way for somebody today listening to this that has no experience with real estate investing or commercial real estate to break into the market. It's not an overwhelming impossibility, is it?
No, in other words, there's a lot of opportunity for people to enter the market because you don't need to be, you're not curing cancer. You don't need to have a degree necessarily. I think, though, that people do need to understand that being a real estate owner or investor comes with a certain amount of risk. And it's a risk-reward conversation, right? Even for myself, I am not my clients, but I do invest in real estate, but in a much smaller way. And I think that it's important to make sure that you appreciate that oftentimes you can make really good money investing in real estate, but every once in a while there's a down market, or you might have a change in your life where you all of a sudden need that liquidity. And, real estate is not a liquid asset the way the stock market is. Not that the stock market is doing so great all the time, but you can't exit so quickly. I think that's the biggest thing I would say about real estate.
We're talking a little bit about the New York market, but I know in a lot of real estate circles, when people are seeking to enter the first time, they look away from some of the more expensive markets, thinking that there are greater opportunities in smaller cities, more rural states. But what is the reason for somebody to invest in New York or one of the larger cities that may have a higher apparent barrier to entry? What are the different risks and rewards that you get in those communities?
That's a good question, because I think there are definitely smarter people in real estate than I who do believe that at the end of the day, places like New York City over the long term will almost always be okay. I'm not talking about, let's not get into climate change right now or things like that yet. So, you're making a calculation that investing in New York City real estate, while more expensive, a harder barrier to entry, will in the long run, though, sustain itself. Whereas certain other locations where it might be easier to become an investor, might have more risk in that sense. But of course, COVID has taught us a lot about real estate and where there might be other opportunities and where there might be risks in investing in a city like New York City or other urban areas.
I know you work with a good number of family offices in this space, but on this topic, as things change, I know a lot of the family offices kind of have a longer time horizon. We've seen a lot of volatility in the market related to COVID, related to drastic changes in interest rates and just different commuting patterns and a lot of things happening over a very short period of time. What are some of the changes that people with a long-term mind should be making now in this market?
So it depends what we mean by long-term, right? So family offices often are characterized as having a 100-year horizon. That is very long-term. Not everyone can really afford to do that. So it kind of depends what we mean here by long-term. But I would say that, again, you just have to be prepared not to have to exit at a particular moment in time. And other than that, there can be a lot of opportunity for everyone, to really ride a healthy real estate market through the ups and downs, right? The biggest thing that real estate people always are concerned about is, will they be unable to refinance their debt, or will they need to, and will that cause them to have to sell into a down market? And that's something that, people can avoid. But with COVID, what we've learned certainly is that, you can have a lovely place in a location where people enjoy living and, can work remotely, and you can make some nice money that way. Now, there are tax implications and all that stuff, but there are really good, nice residential opportunities for smaller players.
One thing is probably too easy of a question, but I know a number of real estate brokers in rural estates who are celebrating the death of the city, that everybody was leaving the larger cities and their markets were that of the future. What do you have to say about that? Have we seen long-term march away from the cities, or is that just wishful thinking on the part of the rural real estate brokers?
It's a great question. I wish I knew the real answer to that. But I would say this, I don't think we should give up on urban cities. I really don't. I think that in the end, younger people enjoy living in more densely populated areas. I think people don't like having a longer commuting time. I think that a lot of people enjoy culture and entertainment and things like that, and those build community. And so I wouldn't give up on urban living yet.
Yeah. I'm going to echo that also. I just spent 20 years living in the city of Boston, like in Boston proper. And, you have to talk about demographics here as well. And, how many people are in these cohorts. Everyone talked about the millennials, but the millennials are in their 40s now, right?
Yeah.
So now it's Generation Z is coming up next, and whatever the next generation is called. And you're right. It's all about community. And having lived the life that I've lived, you can look back and see the different stages. Whereas when you're 20, you don't know the stages that are ahead, right? So, I know what it's like to be post-college. I know what it's like to be, number of first relationship, second relationship, what have you, start to settle down by that first place. I've seen the life cycle as somebody that lived in the city, and I don't see that changing. I just don't, especially with as many people as we have who are coming into their late 20s, 30s, late 30s. You said it right there. I mean, culture, family, community, meeting people. The cities are the way to go. The country, the suburban places, the smaller cities, there's nothing wrong with these places at all. In fact, a lot of the benefits of those are smaller versions of what the cities can offer. But, New York City has just been the melting pot, obviously. We could say that for many, many generations of immigrants coming in there. People live there because it's close to where they work. But community and the culture elements of what a place like New York can offer are going to be the continued draws to draw people in. And you could rinse and repeat and say that about Philadelphia and Boston and Miami and Dallas, Houston, Seattle, whatever, all these big, big cities. COVID was a test, right? But look what's happening now.
Yeah, but I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
That aside, what development looks like in the city, though, certainly has changed. We've seen the death of certain categories of movie theaters, of the suburban shopping mall, of the office to some degree. So what's ahead for commercial development that, how is that going to look different in the next decade than it did a decade ago?
Well, first of all, as I said earlier, there really is not enough residential being built. I mean, there just isn't. And rents are very high in New York City. And it's not healthy for us, I don't think. And in the long term, the question is whether we, think for a minute about the financial downtown, right? When I started out as a young lawyer, there was nothing residential down there. I mean, nothing. Very little restaurant, very little shopping, nothing to do down there. And with the right incentives, community can be built. Battery Park City is amazing. The High Line is beautiful. So I think we just need to really be creative and find ways to repurpose some of the street retail and some of the office, certainly. But unfortunately, that requires some political heft. And, it's hard to find community around politics these days.
Yeah.
Is that our politics the impediment to building more residential and converting other uses into residential?
Well, I wouldn't blame politics entirely, right? It is hard to repurpose an office building in the middle of Midtown into residential, just purely from a construction perspective. Mm-hmm. But some of the requirements that we have, regulatory requirements, are not really of this moment. They date back quite a few years. So I think it's a combination of politics and also maybe a lack of imagination on all of our parts.
Mm-hmm. With your level of experience having worked in New York real estate for so long, and in your role, can you talk a little bit about the importance of building relationships with people at other firms within City Hall? You probably have a really deep network, is what I'm guessing. And my hunch is those are things that happen over time. Maybe you didn't notice it as you were building that network, but now looking back at it, can you comment on just the value of having that deep Rolodex and how that could benefit not just clients, but just anyone that's getting started in this space?
That's a really good point. I didn't realize how important it was when I first started out. And now, of course, it's everything. At the end of the day, it means if I don't know the right person to call, I can call somebody who might know the right person. Somebody can make an introduction for me. You can speak to somebody about a concern that you have. And honestly, it's everything to me. And it's really made my career what it is today. And actually, it's one of the things I worry about for younger people, that they don't see that, and they don't necessarily value that. Professionally, I think it's pretty critical.
I mean, I think that goes hand in hand with kind of the commercial development, kind of this hybrid working from home, prevents the young people who are entering a space from really making those connections, because doing it remotely, is not the same as building these connections. I mean, I think that kind of interestingly goes hand in hand, where cities and urban development, I think, is meant to facilitate connections. That's the purpose of cities. That's the purpose of the commercial construction. Is there any hope that this trend is going to reverse itself? And I ask you that not just as an expert in commercial development, but you work with your own firm, with your own connections. Do you see any of those networks being rebuilt in the post-COVID era?
I do think they're being rebuilt, but it takes it's hard. It takes effort, and it takes it really takes you doubling down your energy on these connections and not taking things for granted, not taking people for granted, not taking your networking contacts for granted. You have to work. Work is work. You have to work it. But, I've been told I'm a bit old-fashioned, that younger people have said to me, I'll say to them, don't come into the office and you could have lunch or dinner with your colleagues or hang out and have a drink. And they're like, if I want to do that, I'll do that with my friends. And maybe I should say, because, I'm older, maybe I overvalued that aspect of my life, and maybe they're undervaluing that, and maybe there'll be a rebalancing where sort of you find that good balance between your work, your personal life. But I certainly think I would tell people that it's critical to come into the office or to meet clients or network.
We do have an interesting dynamic of people in the workforce now, because we've had people that are probably in their mid-20s haven't really gone to the office that much, right? They graduated into a pandemic. They might have been working from their bedroom. Maybe they're going back to the office now a little bit more than they were. And we have people that are older. I mean, I'm in my late 40s, and I remember I love the benefit of working remotely. I mean, like, just how convenient is this? Like, I built my relationships already. Like, I know a lot of people. I know where to go find those people now. And I have credibility that I could speak to both experience and other people who I know to be able to continue with those relationships. And then there's the in-between where, you're still in that developing your Rolodex. I keep saying Rolodex, but that's dated too, right? I mean, isn't it? Like, we're thinking about business cards and an actual Rolodex. It's like having the save icon, right, at the top of the document, where, young people are like, what is that little like black thing? It's like, that's a floppy disk, right? That means save. I don't know where things are going to end up. I do see everything rebounding. I think that, the pendulum is shifting a little bit more back toward going back to the office, with the amount of layoffs that we've seen lately in all industries. And I think that, employers are getting a little bit more empowered, and maybe workers are seeing that and saying, okay, I should probably go back and maybe start building these relationships. And that will lend to the cities rebounding even more than they have, right? Because there was obviously a dearth of people walking around cities 2 years ago. And that is not the case now, at least in Boston. It's certainly not the case. Traffic's back, people are back, but traffic's back. Same thing as New York City. Let me shift gears a little bit because I want to talk about your mentorship work, because you do a lot of work with women in your space. And I'd love it if you could talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in some of the younger women that are graduating college, graduating graduate school, graduating law school, entering your space, entering legal, commercial real estate. How are you able to empower them to get out onto the right foot in a space that is admittedly very male dominated for many, many decades?
And it still is.
Yes.
I think that most importantly, you lead by example and you lead with honesty. And I think pretending that it's easy is a mistake. And I think you need to make sure that you tell your stories and you tell people that it is incredibly hard to balance everything and to break into an industry that's dominated by one group. But you don't give up and you keep pushing and pushing, and you do it with a smile and a laugh. And, you just keep doing it. And I try really hard to be honest with people, to be sympathetic, to bring them to pitches, to introduce them to clients, and just to make sure that they feel supported. I had very good training as a lawyer. I was taught how to be an excellent lawyer, how to be creative, and how to think like a business person. But I did not have a mentor who taught me how to achieve, which in the legal profession is really to bring in business. That's where you own your space. When you have you have business, you're a generator of money. I've also told people women, that there isn't one way to do this. And even though I did not have those options, right? If you had a child, you were considered to be on the mommy track. And I did not want to be on the mommy track, but that now you can have a little bit of a more fluid path, and that you can get on and off the train, on and off the track, whichever analogy works. It doesn't have to be forever.
Yeah, that's, excellent advice. Like, we obviously haven't had to deal with being a woman in a male dominated space like you have. And, those words, I would encourage you to rewind them if you are a female listening to this, if you're male too, because I think it's important for men to understand, what it's like to be a woman in the space. I don't want to use the word plight. I want to use the word experience, right? Because it shouldn't have a negative connotation. It should have this is a different connotation, and we need trailblazers like this, people who can carry the torch through a difficult profession and pass it on to people and explain to them what it's like that succeeded for you, that might succeed for them as well.
Another, shifting gears just a little bit, because I want to make sure I ask about this too. One of the complexities that you've encountered in your career is working with international investors, people from different countries, different backgrounds, kind of all coming together to the same project. And that may add just as much complexity as zoning regulations and, affordable housing limitations. So, can you tell us what any tips you've had or experiences you've had, working across cultural differences in time zones, if it's a matter of practicality, to get these projects done?
Of course. And, New York City is a melting pot, but it's also a place where a lot of capital comes into the country and then is deployed into real estate deals across the country. And people from other countries have different styles, for sure. Working in New York City real estate is probably the best training for that. But yes, you have to understand, and you have to listen to people, right? That, I think, is what it really comes down to. At the end of the day, real estate investing, people are, good people are pretty similar. It's just a question of hearing them and not making certain assumptions about them, but also being patient in explaining to them why what they do in their country might not be how things are done here. But I think being a good listener is part of being a really good lawyer.
Yeah.
How do we do business differently in the United States that might surprise investors and other people from other parts of the world?
Well, in certain parts of the world, it's a lot more opaque, right? Mm-hmm. People are not comfortable disclosing who they are, how much money they're putting in, who their investors are. So I think that as complicated as things might be here, it's still more transparent than in a lot of other countries, is what I would say is the most complicated thing for me to have dealt with.
Before we start to head toward our final couple of questions, I did want to ask one last question about working with family-owned real estate businesses. It's something that you have done for quite some time. What are you seeing with a smaller company that's owned by a small family? Like, what are some of their concerns today that you've really helped them through?
Well, there are different concerns. Some of them are very focused on succession and what's going to happen to the business and what's the best thing for the next generation. Sometimes there are different, I don't know if the right word is values, but different generations feel differently about certain types of investments. And that could be because some prefer doing what's commonly called as, ESG investing or finding real estate adjacent to ESG. And some are like, why real estate when we can invest in the tech sector? Maybe not today because the tech sector is having a moment. But so there are family dynamics, but that's true. Every family has family dynamics. It's just a little more complicated when real estate is involved. And I think accessing good partners to work with when the deals are a little bigger and need more than one family, I think is also a tough thing. As you want to grow your business, how do you find that really good partner? A good lawyer can really be a good thing, but it can't help you if at the end of the day, you have a really bad partner.
Yeah. Or if you just don't want to be in the business anymore. I've seen it happen in my role in media sales for many years where we're kind of dealing with the third generation, sometimes the second generation, but usually the third generation that is just on the out. They're ready to sell, right? The first generation built it up. The second generation saw them build it up and they are now working in the business. And then the third generation is saying, hey, I want to do something entirely different. Can we cash in this asset, sell it on to somebody else?
There are tax implications to doing that. And I think it's working with families and helping them understand the choices and the implications of each choice.
Right. Any final questions for Belinda, Rory, before we get to our last three questions that we ask of everybody?
No, I just want to, actually, yes, because I have a kind of set of listeners in mind. And those are people who, again, are working on the smaller scale investments. They're starting to just build that family wealth, whether they just started with a 2-family in the outer boroughs. What are some of the opportunities or things that they're missing if they're thinking small? Are there trends that they can jump onto, or are there just, other possibilities that they should be aware of?
I think that focusing on the residential space is probably the best space to focus on, whether it's single family homes or a small investment in a larger rental project, because at the end of the day, we all need a place to live. So that's, I think, where I would focus my efforts. I think speculating on doing something in retail or commercial, an office building or something like that will be hard. I think industrial is a great space, but it, is a little more complicated if you're a single and, a smaller investor. So I'd probably focus on residential.
Great. Thank you.
Yes. I agree. Very much so. And I have less experience. But I'll take your words and keep them in the back of my head as I, look for the next investment too. So thank you so much for all that. We will get to a final couple questions that we ask of all of our guests here on the podcast. And then we'd love to hear where people can reach out to you for more information or if they want to say hi. So our first of these three questions is if you can get on stage for half an hour and talk about any subject in the world with zero preparation, what would it be?
I would talk about how important it is to recognize that we each have an obligation to each other to make this world a better place. And that is not inconsistent with making money. And I'm not talking about effective altruism or anything like that. I'm just saying when you do your job, consider who you work with and how you treat them, because life is long.
That's a topic that comes up a lot in the household. We're talking a lot about our 3.5-year-old and how she needs to be cognizant of the world around her and not just her. And I think that lesson leads into business and leads into, you're right, making money, right? And we don't see enough of that these days.
As we do our own investments, it's easy to talk about tax advantages and the bottom line and making sure we're maximizing revenue. But we also want to set a good example for her too. She's watching us, and I want to make sure that she understands that we do this. We want to be successful, but we also want to be good members of the communities that we operate in. We want to make sure that we are treating everybody that comes to work with us, whether they are a cleaner of a property or a professional along the way. We want to make sure that we're treating everybody well. So thank you for that. And we'll keep that in mind as we go forward too.
Second question, tell us something that happened early in your life or career that impacts the way that you're working today.
Well, I guess I'll pick something early in my career when I was told that I'll never make it. I'll never be a success in real estate law. I have no chance, and I should find something else to do with my time. Maybe pick a different field of law, maybe family law, maybe a not-for-profit, all good things, but it's not what I wanted to do. And I took that as a challenge. Mm-hmm. And, that message is conveyed, no longer typically conveyed as explicitly, but it is often conveyed in little messages that people sort of send you like, oh, you're going to be going home to your children now, right? I mean, obviously they don't do that to me anymore, and my children are adults, but it's staying true to who you are and not letting other people tell you what you are capable of.
Do you think things are improving on that level now versus 10, 20 years ago? Are people more cognizant of work-life balance and what little comments like that might do to the confidence of somebody as they try to improve their career but also have a family?
I think it's gotten better, but I don't think it's great. Yeah. And by the way, women are not the only people who are, experience these, whatever you want to call them. I don't know if it's appropriate to call them microaggressions. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I'm not intellectually capable of defining it, but I think until you yourself experience something like that, you really don't understand. And it just means be more careful, be more conscious. I think we all could be more conscious of how we behave. Yeah. But yeah.
I worked in business for a long time, and I don't think I had the empathy toward other parents until I became a parent later on in life, toward the very, very end of my career. And not like I was a bad manager. I thought I was a really good manager, actually. You probably ask a lot of people, and they would probably agree that I was a good manager, either of them or of other people. But, until you're a parent, you don't get what the parent's going through. You just don't. And now I look back and I wonder what I would have done differently, to people that had young children along the way. I think I treated people right, but again, I understand, when you see other parents that have children about the age that you're at, you kind of look in their eyes and you're like, I get it. Yeah. I know what you're going through right now. And we were just in a situation last week where we drove back during rush hour. I drove back during rush hour with a screaming child in the back of my car for a half an hour, irrationally screaming after we went to go see a character at a store. And it was during rush hour. And it was the commute that I would have had to have been doing if I was still at the same company that I just left many months ago. And I'm like, I can't believe that I had even a remote consideration of doing this commute. I would not survive that commute for a week, especially with a child. Not with the child in the back of me, but just with a child. I wanted to be around more for her. So, that kind of empathy, I don't think I got. But now I do. And it must be amplified, for people that are working in the city, having to commute out to the suburbs, having to, delicately balance that work-life balance, which is tough.
It's hard. But as we did say before, it is work and it is a business. And, businesses do need to make money, to pay everyone's salaries, et cetera. And so it's complicated, but we just have to do better. That's all. Mm-hmm.
And our final question, Belinda, tell us something that you're listening to, watching, or reading these days.
So I'm actually watching Peaky Blinders. I don't know if it's Amazon or Netflix or whichever. And I like watching anything where there's a family at the center of a story and how complicated it can get.
Have you seen Succession?
Oh my God, yes.
Talk about
And I'm looking
complicated.
forward to the next season.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, if you could tell everyone where they could reach out to you if they want to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, or anything involved with Herrick Feinstein LLP, your work is the chair of the real estate department there. What's the best way to reach out?
Sure. Just send me an email, bschwartz@herrick.com.
All right. We'll put that in the show notes along with links to your website so people can easily find you if they have additional questions. And Rory, how can people reach out to you?
I can be found through my law practice, Urban Village Legal. That's urbanvillagelegal.com, or through my real estate brokerage, Next Home Titletown. That's nexthometitletown.com.
All right. Belinda, do you watch football? Are you Giants or Jets?
You know what? One of my clients owns a team, and it's not the Giants or the Jets, so I'm very careful.
You're the other team. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I was going to try to figure out that part of her, because people outside New York don't understand that it's one or the other. Like, I grew up in a Giants household and we did not like the Jets, and the Jets people don't like the Giants, even though we're all in the New York area. Belinda, thank you so much for joining us today for the Real Estate Law Podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know you a little bit more and learn more about all the work that you've done and the great mentorship and your insights into commercial real estate, the New York market, leadership, formulating a really long and prosperous career in such a crazy real estate market such as New York. So, we appreciate your time today, and thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
This has been the Real Estate Law Podcast. Because real estate is more than just pretty pictures, and law goes well beyond the paperwork and courtroom arguments. We're powered by Next Home Titletown, Greater Boston's progressive real estate brokerage. More at nexthometitletown.com. And Urban Village Legal, Massachusetts Real Estate Counsel, serving savvy property owners, lenders, and investors. More at urbanvillagelegal.com. Today's conversation was not legal advice, but we hope you found it entertaining and informative. Discover more at realestatelawpodcast.com. Thank you for listening.